You might have seen the title of this video and clicked on this and thought, wait, how is this country music's flop era? Didn't it just have a record-breaking year where 4 separate times a country song topped the all-genre Hot 100? And on 3 separate occasions, the top 3 songs in the whole country were all country songs, which hasn't even happened in 30 years. And you're sitting here saying that country music's in some kind of flop era? Well, here's what I mean. What if I told you that in the last few months there have been new albums from Dustin Lynch, Darius Rucker, Tim McGraw, Ashley McBryde, the Brothers Osborne, Walker Hayes, Brett Young. All people that have had big radio careers and all people that I've covered extensively here on this channel. Would you even know? Did you even know? Because if you actually look at album sales data, it appears that no one knows. And that almost every other country album out of the gate is just tanking. Now hear me out at the very beginning of this video. I am not saying that these artists are tanking. I am not saying that they have not built amazing careers. I'm not even saying that they're not still growing and expanding their fan base. I'm saying that there is a broken element within the country music industry at the moment. And as most albums get released, they arrive with a whimper, not a roar. Walker Hayes' last album, Country Stuff, debuted at number 2 on the country albums chart. But his new one, called New Money, didn't chart at all. Like, nowhere in the top 50. Every single one of Dustin Lynch's albums until his newest one debuted in the top 10. But his newest, Kill the Cowboy, debuted at number 47 on the country chart. In its first week, it did 5,000 units, and that's sales plus streaming equivalent albums. Tim McGraw, for decades, has almost always debuted at the top of the chart, and 3 of his last 4 albums debuted at number 1. But his most recent album, Standing Room Only, started in 17th. When the Brothers Osborne and Ashley McBryde recently released albums, they each debuted at number 28 on the country chart. Yeah, 28th place. Ashley started with about 8,000 sales plus streaming units, and that was actually a lot better than someone like Morgan Wade, who started around 6,000. Brett Young also recently started with around 6,000 units, and Brett Young has giant smashes, a lot of big hits, and to only have enough interest to move about 6,000 units in your first week is wild to me. And no one told me that Brett Young was even releasing an album. I feel like I've got a very engaged audience of country fans, and sometimes these albums come out and there's not one DM about them. There's not anyone saying, oh Grady, is this album on your radar? You should check it out. It's like they don't even know about it. I actually recently did some polls over on my Instagram to ask if people had heard recent releases, and on album after album, the votes were like 80 to 90%, nope, I never checked it out, I never listened. And it seems like so many albums just never even entered the public's consciousness. Parker McCollum, a huge buzzy star with huge social engagement, his album arrived in 12th place. Jake Owen, huge, his album didn't even chart. I couldn't even find sales data for people like Ian Munsick, Chase Rice, Ernest, Kip Moore, and I couldn't find any sales data for newer people like Ashley Cook, Jade Eagleson, Kylie Morgan. And I'm just sitting here wondering, where are these albums? What happened to them? It's like they arrive and then you never hear about them again. Or at least I don't, and I promise you, I'm not trying to shade these artists at all. It takes so much work, effort, soul to actually make something for public consumption. That's not easy to do. But when it comes to the act of an album release, so many of them just feel dead right now. Now, if you're Taylor Swift, obviously you know how to engineer a great album drop. In fact, the top-selling country debut of all of 2023 is technically Taylor Swift's re-release of Speak Now, which did 700,000 units in its first week. But in general, gone are the days where Times Square is flooded by teenagers hoping to get a glimpse of NSYNC and then flooding the record stores trying to buy 1 million copies of No Strings Attached in its first week. That's really not happening in country music at the moment, with some very notable exceptions. And for those people, it's really happening. The biggest debuts of 2023 were Speak Now, Morgan Wallen's One Thing at a Time, which started around 500,000 units, Zach Bryan's self-titled at 200,000, and then you had Dolly Parton's Rockstar album, Luke Combs' Getting Old, and then Jelly Roll's Whitsick Chapel. Then going down the list, you had Chris Stapleton, Hardy, Bailey Zimmerman, Tyler Childers, Shania Twain, Cody Johnson, Jason Aldean, Nate Smith, and those are all of the ones that actually got past 20,000 units in their first week. And when you look at the Billboard country albums chart week to week, basically every single week you'll see some of the albums I just listed, plus some old ones from Luke and Morgan and Chris Stapleton's Traveler. Streaming is just so big, and the catalog of some of these artists is so popular that their albums continue to dominate the top ranks of the chart. And even an album that debuts respectably, like Old Dominion's new one, which started with 15,000 units, starts one rung below Luke Combs' 2017 album in like its 300-something week. And that's sort of hard for me to even fathom, You are one of the biggest bands in country music. You win CMA awards every year. You have hit after hit after hit, and yet when you drop a new album, it does not beat Luke Combs' debut album, which is now over 6 years into its run. That's a crazy thing to think about, isn't it? Now, the upside for the industry is that if you come out with an album that really connects to the public, it never seems to go away. If you make one like Morgan Wallen or Luke Combs or Jelly Roll, they just seem to keep consuming it. And so there is hope for the industry that some of these albums can become gigantic in the long run. So it's not all just about the debut week. That may be the way it used to be, but it's not how it is now. Catalog matters more. Your backlog of songs can endure in a way that makes you a sales powerhouse quietly. And a good example of that right now would be someone like Lainey Wilson. I remember when Bell Bottom Country came out last year and just did 10,000 units in its first week. I was like, damn, Lainey's on Yellowstone. Lainey is the it girl of country music, and that started with 10,000 units. But that album this year has kept clicking along. It's continued to sort of assert itself within the chart. I'm not saying it's become as big as Morgan Wallen, but it has become an extremely respectable performer over time. But you have to maintain some heat and some momentum for that type of longevity to happen. And Lainey's done that at awards, with super high profile collaborations, and also through trends on TikTok where the big booty trend with Heart Like a Truck certainly did raise her profile. If you're an album like, say, the new one by the Brothers Osborne, if your album doesn't start very big at all, and then there aren't any consistent beats that get people talking and listening to the music, it just seems to disappear. I've been checking the streams of that album, and they're not moving up fast at all. You could say the same thing about Dierks Bentley's last album, Gravel and Gold. It just kind of appeared, and then promptly fell off a cliff. But for the four kingpins of country music, Morgan, Luke, Jelly Roll, and Bailey Zimmerman. Oh, and Zach, I guess 5 kingpins. Those albums just keep chugging along with a ferocity that is crazy to watch. Hardy's has been doing that. Like I said, Lainey's been doing that. Megan Maroney's has kind of been chugging along. I mean, for what it's worth, Megan Maroney's album Lucky started with 17,000 units, and that's not too shabby for a debut album. That's the same range as Turnpike Troubadours. It's slightly better than Elle King did. It's only 1,000 less than Dan and Shay's newest. But what Megan has really been able to do that maybe those bands haven't is maintain her public image, keep people talking about her, interested in her music, releasing big collaborations, and being a very savvy social media user. And that album has continued to do well and well and well, whereas some of the others you don't hear about much. But despite all of these changes that are happening in the landscape of country music and country media, the industry machine just seems to keep churning along and doing business as usual. I feel like album rollouts have become so predictable. It's like, let's get that artist on the summer concert series of the Today Show and see if that does anything. Let's get a profile in that magazine and see if it does anything. Let's have an industry showcase event, or let's have an album launch party and really get people here in Nashville talking. As if that stuff does anything, really, for the public consumers. I'm not trying to just trash the labels. I do think they still wield quite a bit of influence when it comes to radio, and even playlists on the streaming services. Like, I see that the labels can still figure out how to get their songs on big playlists on Spotify and Apple Music. You're like, oh, why is this random ass artist the #1 song on Hot Country? Oh, because they have a major label that somehow got them there. And so the labels do still have levers that they can pull to get some attention, but in general, I think the album rollouts are sort of surrounded by some antiquated practices. Like, I get press releases every single day. So many of them emailed to me, and I got even more back when I was a journalist. But sometimes it feels like the PR strategy for a lot of labels is still extremely reliant on the print model of media. It's still very focused on getting reviews in big magazines, or getting features in a newspaper, or getting the blogosphere talking about stuff. It's serving the content to the gatekeepers, but the reality of the social media age is no one really cares about the gatekeepers anymore, and so the veneer of some of that PR stuff really working seems to be gone. People would rather listen to a peer of theirs on YouTube or someone they follow on TikTok than they would a journalist or some big media institution, because no one trusts them. And as a former member of the media, you shouldn't. In general, and I don't even know what this would look like, if there was a way that we could connect PR strategy to actual streams of songs, I think it could totally change how that industry works. Maybe PR and marketing becomes less trying to get coverage for an album and more figuring out strategies that drive people to listen to the album. Whether that is arranging for viral moments or setting up situations that are going to get people talking online. Whatever it might look like, I think there's probably room for it to change. The other reality we gotta talk about here is that there's just more music getting released. Way more music. Like over 100,000 songs a day. And so much music is is just getting lost in the shuffle. Like, I try to listen to as much music as possible, and there's just too much. It's not possible. And so I recognize that it is not easy to cut through that and make a big splash. But that's why right now I kind of think social media is all that matters. If people don't have active, engaged fan bases on their social media, nothing really moves. They kind of don't do anything when it comes to sales. And you might say, well, what the heck, Grady? Morgan Wallen doesn't post a lot anymore. Are you saying he has this very active, engaged fan base when he's not posting? And yes, I am. He doesn't need to post that much anymore because his fans do so much posting for him. It becomes different when you are at that level of stardom. But you gotta remember, he was one of the first artists to really lean in and let TikTok run with a sound like the super viral one for 7 Summers. Luke Combs came up on Vine and trained his fan base to be very socially engaged. Like, look at who's really working. They're all very social. Bailey Zimmerman came up on TikTok. Jelly Roll and his wife Bunny have an extremely active online presence. Megan Moroney and Lainey Wilson are also very online, and their teams know how to get people to use their music in their own content. And again, this is something that Lainey Wilson nailed on Heart Like a Truck, even duetting some of the big booty videos. Meanwhile, you have all these artists that haven't fully embraced TikTok, and they might occasionally hop on and say, hey guys, pre-save my new single. It comes out in October, and they do it with minimum enthusiasm, and they wonder why their socials aren't popping.
Hey everybody, I wanted to let you know that my new track, Give Her That, is available as an official sound on TikTok.
To celebrate the 10th anniversary of my album, True Believers, I'm releasing it on vinyl.
And then of course the artists start to resent having to make reels and TikToks, and they get really burnt out, when in reality there could be a savvier marketing strategy in getting users to generate TikToks using these artists' music, rather than just forcing the artists to figure out how to market themselves on their own. This year we've seen new artists like Dylan Gossett, like Wyatt Flores, whose first day streams absolutely demolish some of the artists I've been talking about. Like, you can go on Spotify, if you go on your desktop, and you can see all the streams for songs that weren't the big pre-release album tracks from an artist. I love to do this a few days after an album's been out. You can do it right now with Darius Rucker's album. And some of these songs, even a few months later, still haven't even hit 100,000 streams. Meanwhile, you go to someone like this kid, Dylan Gossett, who doesn't even have any kind of hit at radio. And he's got a song, Cold, that's been out for a few months, that's like over 40 million streams. Take something like Beneath Oak Trees, that's not even this giant viral sound. And it's doing pretty damn well for a random kid that's just posting on social media. Same with the stuff from Wyatt Flores, same with the stuff from Sam Barber. And I'm not saying that there's no help for them in getting those kinds of numbers, but they are playing a more strategic game. And I know that that must be a tough truth for people getting older in the industry. Like, if you're Brett Young and you have found great success and wealth pursuing a more traditional radio strategy, you're probably not going to be as motivated to just switch everything up. But the alternative to not switching stuff up is that it seems like no one really checks out your music when you drop it. An alternative strategy would be to maybe look at what Blake Shelton has been doing for many years now. In 2019, he got a lot of negative headlines when he announced, I'm not recording country albums anymore. He said, I already recorded God's Country. I don't feel like recording a whole album because I already have a full show of hits. And from now on, I'm just gonna go song by song. And people complained, but hey, that destroys the sanctity of the album. I think I probably said that. But now, I kind of get it. Like, if Blake Shelton is not interested in launching an album and doing the work that it takes for it to become part of that small subset of like maybe 10% of albums that really blow up and stand strong and become huge over time, maybe it's just better to not play that game at all and go single by single. That being said, if you're willing to lean in to the album and make each album a moment, you can end up with the Eras Tour, but that's not easy. And I would personally hate to see albums as eras disappear. That's kind of what press cycles have always been driven by, and even just thinking of artists in these certain times in their careers and certain fashions and color schemes. I do think there is a lot of merit to maintaining that. But at the same time, I don't begrudge Blake for saying, I don't want to play anymore. You know, this whole video really is just me kind of spitballing and sort of noticing. Have we all seen that every other country album seems to just be flopping? But it's a conversation I just wanted to bring up, and I hope this is a coherent enough video. I'm not even offering many good solutions as much as I am just saying, hey, I see a problem. And I have to think these are conversations that every big label is having, or at least should be having. Some page has clearly turned in the past year, and albums that used to be kind of middling performers are just completely off the chart now. People seem to be fatigued and unexcited to check out new music, and that's not good. And mostly for the artist's sake, I hope we can figure out ways to remedy this, to recapture attention, and for album album releases to become big events again. Because it's fun when albums are big events. It's gratifying for artists. It's gratifying as a fan. And I don't want country music to be in its flop era. Hopefully this video is a little bit more thoughtful than the title might have implied, but if not, you can let me know down below. All my links are down below. I'd love if you subscribe to the channel if you liked this, and I'll be back with more country content very soon. Bye, guys.